Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of 2 Corinthians. We began our study yesterday looking at the introduction of this letter from the Apostle Paul to the church in Corinth. Notice again verse number 2. To the church of God in Corinth, together with all the saints throughout Achaia, or throughout Greece. Now, the letter is to the Christian believers in the Greek city of Corinth. Actually, Paul himself had founded this church. That occurred on what we call his second missionary journey. And we find the account of that founding in the book of Acts, chapter 18. So let's turn to that. Now, on the second missionary journey, Paul had been traveling in the northern part of Greece, Macedonia, and then he travels to the southern part of Greece. He had spent a little time in the city of Athens, and then he goes to the city of Corinth. Chapter 18 of the book of Acts says, now after this, that is after Paul leaves Athens, he goes to Corinth. And there he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had ordered all the Jews to leave Rome. Paul went to see them, and because he was a tent maker as they were, he stayed and worked with them. Every Sabbath he reasoned in the synagogue, trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. Now, this is the beginning of his ministry in Corinth. He had come to the city, and there he met two other Jews, a man and his wife, who had recently come from Rome, Aquila and Priscilla. Now, we're told they had traveled from Rome and relocated to Corinth because Claudius, the Roman emperor, had expelled all the Jews from the city of Rome. Now, we know from Roman sources that occurred in the year AD 49. So we're probably in the year around AD 50, it's certainly after 49, around AD 50, when Paul arrives in Corinth. And he comes into a business association with Aquila and Priscilla, for they were tent makers as he was. They were also Christian believers. And so they began a ministry of working together, meeting their financial needs by their tent making business, but also preaching the gospel, first in the synagogues, the Jewish synagogues, and then reaching out to more and more Gentiles. So Paul arrives in the city of Corinth, the year AD 50, begins his ministry. As you read on through the chapter, we're told that he stays there for a year and a half, and then is brought upon charges before the Roman governor, of which he is acquitted, and then stays a little longer. So putting all that together, we know that the Apostle Paul spent about 2 years in the city of Corinth establishing the Christian church there. So from about AD 50 to around AD 52, in that time frame, Paul is ministering in Corinth, establishing a vital Christian church. Now, Corinth was a great city. It was a large city. And if you look at an ancient map, a map of Greece, you'll notice that Corinth sits on that narrow piece of land that joins the southern and the northern parts of Greece. So that puts Corinth in a very strategic location trade-wise. You have harbors on both sides of Corinth. So all east-west traffic that went by sea, going from Rome to the east or coming from the east back to Rome, would pass through Corinth. You had a harbor on each side with just a few miles between them, so ships would make the journey, harbor, transport their cargo those few miles overland, put it on another ship going in the opposite direction. All that trade passing through Corinth made it a great commercial center, a lot of wealth in the city of Corinth. Also, the narrow jut of land that joins northern and southern Greece, traffic north and south would go through it on trade. So you've got north and south traffic from North Greece to southern Greece, and east and west traffic from Rome to the eastern parts of the empire. All that trade flowing through Corinth made it a great metropolis and a great commercial center with a lot of wealth. So it's a fabulous city, but a very pagan city. Very pagan city. Paul stays there for 2 years, long time, and establishes a vital church. Now, we know he left Corinth in the year AD 52, around there somewhere, went back to Antioch, the sending church in Syria, and then began his third missionary journey, where he went to the city of Ephesus, which is in Asia Minor. We know he stayed there between 2 and 3 years, ministering in Ephesus. Now, toward the end of his ministry at Ephesus, he writes the 2 letters of Corinthians. 1 Corinthians, probably early, maybe in the spring of AD 54, and then 2 Corinthians later in the year of 54. So the church itself in Corinth was established in the years 50 to 52. And then a couple of years later, Paul writes these letters. 1 Corinthians in the spring of AD 54, maybe. And then maybe 2 Corinthians in the latter part of the year 54, certainly close in that time frame. After Paul had left the Corinthian church, issues had arisen, problems, questions, and the letters are written to address those. 1 Corinthians deals with lots of questions they had, lots of situations in the church. That letter did not correct all the situations, so he writes another letter a few months later, which is 2 Corinthians. So that's the letter we're looking at in our study. The second one that he wrote to the church in Corinth, founded a couple of years before, some issues and questions that had arisen in the church, and as their founding pastor and their leader, spiritual leader, he's trying to help them sort through these problems. It's going to be a very interesting letter as we work our way through all that Paul addresses to these relatively young churches. They're only a few years old. These are new Christians, and he's trying to help them find their way in the faith. So join us tomorrow as we continue looking at our 5-minute Bible study of the book of 2 Corinthians.